Hello, coaches. Welcome back to the series on the ICF 2025 updates to the Core Competencies. I'm Brighton West, the host of this series, and I'm really excited to be moving on to number 7, Evokes Awareness. And I have Jedidiah Alex Coe with us. He is an MCC, a mentor coach, a coach educator. He can mention anything that I've forgotten there. He's got a great resume, and he's been part of this process. So, Jedidiah, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Brighton. And you can call me Jedi, very much like Star Wars, so it's easy to remember.
Perfect. So, Jedi, let's go ahead and start off with a brief overview of Evokes Awareness. What does that mean?
So I love this core competencies. In 2019, when ICF did a major overhaul of the entire core competencies, the powerful questioning and direct communication as well, communicating effectively, has been combined into this process called evoking awareness. I think one of the most important thing in the process, it's asking the question of how do we facilitate the client's learning and insight in the entirety of the process. And by using tools such as powerful questioning, metaphors, silence, even analogies will help the client to go deeper within themselves. So when we look at evoking awareness, it's not just about just questions. It's about using the various tools in appropriate time and appropriate space to really facilitate that moment of insight.
Great. Thank you so much for that overview. Now let's go into what has changed. And I know there's not a huge answer to this, but what has changed in the 2025 update?
Well, one of the key change that happened in the 2025 update was just one little word or one little change of word, and that's the word knowledge. If we look at the subcompetency of 7.11, and I like the idea of 7-Eleven, it's this idea of sharing observations, knowledge and feelings that without attachment from the coach perspective, and that has the potential to create and create insights for the clients as well. Too often, a lot of coaches think about, I have to give my insights, I have to give my analysis, I have to give something to the client. And now with the better refinement, we begin to realize the insights is client-led. So allowing the client to generate their own insights. And the role for the coach is when we have some observations to share or some knowledge to share, and we're sharing it with no attachment, and giving the space for the client to connect the dots for themselves as well. So that's the minor change that's happened, moving the word from insight to knowledge, from the role of the coach and from the role of the client, connecting the insights for themselves.
Great. This is great because when I read this change, I started to think that this was maybe giving the coach a little bit more flexibility or a little bit more potential to share things that might be creeping into consulting, though. So maybe you can address that. Is that something that you guys talked about? Was sharing knowledge, putting on the hat of a consultant, or how do you keep that barrier strong?
Yeah, but I love that question. In fact, one of the key questions that often come up is, hey, coaches have knowledge, or maybe they have certain expertise or have experiences in the past, and how do they use those to help the client? Do we share advice? Do we tell the clients what to do? Well, if you take on the coaching hat, and you notice the word is facilitate, and when we look at that in conjunction with Competency 7, which is on evoking awareness, we ask ourselves the question, who is giving that awareness? It's the awareness being forced upon the client, or is it through the process of coaching in that conversational space that awareness emerges from the conversation itself? So in the very same light, the role of the coach, yes, we have certain expertise, certain experiences, certain knowledge that we have from our own different industries or own different domains. But in that process of conversation, we find appropriate moments to ask clients for permission to share some ideas, some thoughts, some knowledge. And the key word here, it's without attachment. So I may be wrong. I may be sharing something that might not connect for the client, and that's okay. And so I like the idea where we let the coaches know that it's sharing without attachment. And why do we share it? We share it to help the client to evoke deeper sense of awareness. In the space of the client's world, whenever they think through certain issues or certain situations in their own challenges or their own problems, one of the key things is that they've reached a certain boundary of their exploration. And what needs to happen, it's like the coach role is to provide the little enzyme, the little catalyst for the client to just have the little moment of insight. And so that happens through the process of sharing, but sharing with permission first. Inviting the client by saying, hey, can I have permission to share some thoughts, share some ideas, share some observations? Once the client says, hey, hey, coach, go ahead, I would love to hear your thoughts as well. And when I share my thoughts, I hold it loosely without any form to say that, hey, that's my thoughts are the best thoughts. But I let it loosely and allow them and invite the client into that space to take on what I've just shared. The client can reject that, or the client can say, hey, that's a new idea, that's a new insight, and I want to connect that with the thoughts that I had earlier. So it's really helping to weave the thread of insights for the client.
Awesome. Thank you so much for going into detail there. So let's back out now just from 7-Eleven to 7, and let's kind of talk about what does it look like when a coach has really mastered this core competency. And then we're going to go and ask the flip side of the question, which is what does it look like when they haven't mastered this core competency? But let's stick to what it looks like when they were doing it really well.
So for coaches, when they're beginning the journey of learning Competency 7, a lot of coaches first begin learning how to ask better questions. And the first step of that, noticing that Competency 7 can only happen once we have mastered active listening or listens actively. And that only happens when we are fully present in the moment with the client. So when coaches do this competency well, we begin to see behaviors such as coaches pausing, reflecting, helping the client to create connecting new meaning, helping the client to create new alignments that were never there before, or helping the client to create that catalytic moment for them to create new insights and learnings for themselves. And we call this generative conversations, where in that moment you co-create that space for the client to have new emergence of insights, learnings, where the client feels, hey, I own this insight, I own this learning, I feel energized to act. And the motivation comes from within as well, because now the client is saying, hey, I enjoy these insights, this is what I own, this is what I've created, and I want to be able to take the next step forward. And for the role of the coach is then for us to really demonstrate that space for the client, to be curious, to employ the right tool and the right technique at the right moment for the client, not to force a particular tool that we enjoy or that we like, but really to demonstrate a sense of curiosity, presence, flexibility, agility, and yet creating that space to allow the client to create that connection for themselves. And that's where we see awareness that's not forced, but awareness that emerges from that conversation through that generative conversation.
Okay, so now let's flip that question over and let's look at what does it look like when a coach is more struggling with this competency.
Well, for coaches, when they're struggling with this competency, they tend to have a certain way of thinking about the situation the client is facing, or the coach already has a pre-answer that they think, okay, this is the answer, and so coaches are holding the answer too tightly, and they're listening out for an answer that they want to listen for, rather than being open to the possibilities that emerge. Another part where coaches tend to struggle a lot is they tend to memorize questions. So naturally, a lot of times when we come across this competency, the first thing is, what questions should I ask? And the question should not be what questions should I ask, rather, how am I listening to the client? What am I listening for? So one of the tendencies is coaches tend to memorize questions and they fire questions almost like an interrogation for the client. And so that pushes the client back to say, hey, why I feel like I'm being interrogated by the coach. And another part where coaches tend to fall into, it's pushing for a solution without allowing that space to linger, to discover, to allow that emergence of awareness. Or when the coach shares too strongly a certain advice or certain knowledge, especially when coaches tend to have a lot of domain knowledge or expertise in an area, and the coach feels that their knowledge or their advice would really help the client. And sometimes the best way to help the client is just to hold that space and to keep that silence where awareness is not imposed, awareness is created for that moment for the client.
Awesome. I love the way you put that. Wonderful. So maybe now, before we wrap up, is there anything that we missed, any little piece that you'd like to share about this core competency?
So I enjoy this competency a lot because it moves us from the space of trying to memorize what's the right question. And oftentimes we're so focused on the questions and we don't realize that in evoking of awareness, there are a whole plethora of tools that we can use. And silence, it's one of the most beautiful things we can use in that process. Metaphors, use the client's language, step into the client's world, the client's map of the world, and even in entering the client's world. And just being curious about that space there. And oftentimes I say that coaching, it's not questions to be memorized, but coaching is an experience to be experienced. And so you're inviting the client into this space and journeying with them. And if you think about this, with evoking awareness, it's who's doing the evoking here? Is the coach trying to evoke the awareness? Or are we allowing that space of the generative coaching conversation to emerge awareness, and where the awareness will lead to the clients having new learnings, new discoveries, new realizations, and inviting them to take that learnings forward. And that's how it connects to Competency 8 as we move forward to facilitating learning and growth.
I love that, emerging awareness. So thank you so much, Jedi. And I will invite the rest of you who are watching here, who are witness to this conversation, to go on to see either the next core competency, which is number 8 up here, or if you haven't started from the beginning, you can go down here to start from the beginning and see all the core competencies. We've got a great group of coaches who are here, who've worked on these competencies to explain those competencies to you. Thank you so much for watching, and Jedi, thank you so much for being here.